Altitude alarms screamed as a $60 million prototype dropped into an unrecoverable flat spin over the Mojave. Aviation giant Kestrel Dynamics had just lost their third test pilot to the Chimera project. They were out of options, out of time, and out of heroes. They needed a disgraced renegade. Victoria Corcoran wiped grease from her knuckles with a rag that was mostly aviation oil by now. The blistering Nevada sun beat down on the corrugated tin roof of her rented hangar, baking the air until it smelled of ozone, hot aluminum, and stale coffee. 2 years ago, she had been strapped into the cockpit of an F-35 Lightning II, leading a classified DARPA strike package over hostile airspace. Today, she was replacing the spark plugs on a 1978 Piper Cherokee for a local crop duster who paid her in crumpled $100 bills and a weary nod. She threw the rag onto a nearby workbench, staring out at the heat ripples dancing over the cracked tarmac of the civilian airfield. At 32, Victoria was supposed to be at the absolute peak of her military aviation career. She had the reflexes of a cornered predator and a tactical mind that had once earned her comparisons to legendary test pilots like Chuck Yeager and Scott Crossfield. But all those accolades had evaporated in a span of 3 chaotic minutes over the Mediterranean Sea. The military tribunal had called it gross insubordination and reckless endangerment of military assets. Victoria called it saving her wingman's life. During a high-stakes interception drill that had unexpectedly turned into a live-fire skirmish with unidentified rogue drones, her wingman's hydraulic systems had failed. Command had explicitly ordered Victoria to abandon the compromised jet and secure the airspace. Instead, Victoria broke formation, inverted her jet directly above her wingman to disrupt the drone's targeting lock with her own electronic countermeasures, and escorted him down to a hard but survivable crash landing. She saved his life, but the subsequent engine stall on her own multi-million-dollar aircraft resulted in a total hull loss. Her commanding officer, General Rafferty Aldridge, a man who valued protocol and budget spreadsheets over human lives, had her stripped of her flight status and unceremoniously discharged before the press even caught wind of the incident. She was blacklisted. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. None of the major defense contractors would touch a pilot with a dishonorable discharge for intentionally destroying a next-generation fighter. Meanwhile, 300 miles away at Edwards Air Force Base, General Aldridge was staring at a completely different kind of disaster. Aldridge, who had recently retired his military uniform for an Armani suit to act as the CEO of Kestrel Dynamics, was watching his career burn on a telemetry monitor. The X-77 Chimera, a highly classified, variable geometry experimental interceptor, was failing spectacularly. The jet was designed to be the crown jewel of next-generation aerial dominance. It boasted an aero-elastic wing design that morphed mid-flight to reduce drag, and a revolutionary NeuroSync flight computer that directly interfaced with the pilot's helmet, theoretically cutting reaction times down to milliseconds. There was only one catastrophic problem: the human body could not handle it. The Chimera was designed to pull maneuvers at Mach 3 that generated upward of 11 Gs of force. Standard G-suits and breathing techniques couldn't stop the blood from draining from the pilot's brains. Worse, the NeuroSync computer was overly sensitive. It fed so much sensory data into the pilot's optic nerves that it induced sudden, violent spatial disorientation. "Telemetry lost," a pale technician whispered in the crowded, blue-lit control room of Kestrel Dynamics. On the massive digital map at the front of the room, the blinking green icon representing the Chimera vanished. A collective gasp rippled through the engineering team. Aldridge slammed his fist onto the console, his jaw locked in a rigid line. "Status on the pilot," Aldridge barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Rescue teams are en route to the ejection coordinates, sir," the flight director replied, his hands trembling over his keyboard. "It's Diesel O'Keefe. He pulled the ejection handle at 10,000 feet after entering a flat spin. Biometrics indicate he lost consciousness 12 seconds prior to ejection. The jet is a total loss in the desert." That was the third prototype destroyed in 6 months. O'Keefe, one of the most decorated test pilots in the civilian sector, was now the third man hospitalized by the Chimera. The Department of Defense had given Kestrel Dynamics an ultimatum: complete a successful Mark III orbital edge combat simulation by the end of the month, or the Pentagon was pulling their multi-billion-dollar funding and giving the contract to Boeing. Aldridge retreated to his glass-walled office overlooking the hangar floor. He poured himself a glass of neat scotch, his mind racing. He had cycled through the best test pilots the Navy and Air Force had to offer. Every single one of them had blacked out, panicked, or been overwhelmed by the NeuroSync interface. The jet was too fast, too aggressive, and completely unforgiving. It required a pilot who didn't just fly by the manual. It needed a pilot who relied on raw, almost psychopathic instinct. It needed someone who didn't panic when the aircraft pushed past the theoretical limits of physics. He stared at his reflection in the glass, a bitter taste rising in his throat that had nothing to do with the scotch. He knew exactly who had that instinct. He had fired her 2 years ago. The dust had barely settled on Victoria's driveway when a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to her hangar. It looked entirely out of place among the rusted pickup trucks and scattered fuselage parts of the Mojave civilian strip. Victoria didn't stop wrenching the bolt on the Cherokee's engine block as Aldridge stepped out of the SUV. He looked older, the stress of corporate aerospace carving deep canyons into his face, though his posture remained as rigidly arrogant as it had been at her court-martial. "I see you've moved up in the world, Corcoran," Aldridge said, his voice struggling to project over the roar of a distant twin-engine prop plane taking off. Victoria finally turned, wiping a streak of oil off her forehead. Her expression was completely devoid of surprise. "General Aldridge, I'd offer you a coffee, but I don't think your digestive system can handle anything that costs less than $30 a cup. What do you want?" "I'm the CEO of Kestrel Dynamics now," he said, stepping into the shade of the hangar, carefully avoiding a puddle of brake fluid. "I read the trade magazines. Congratulations on monetizing your lack of a moral compass. Why are you in my hangar?" Aldridge let the insult slide. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the workbench next to her tools. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "I have a problem, Victoria. A $60 million problem." Victoria glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Sounds like a you problem. We're building the X-77 Chimera. You've probably heard the rumors." "I've heard you've turned 3 of them into expensive desert art installations," Victoria shot back, leaning against the propeller. "And put 3 good men in the ICU. Diesel O'Keefe is a friend of mine. I heard his retinas nearly detached from the G-force. The jet is mechanically flawless," Aldridge insisted, his tone hardening. "The issue is the NeuroSync interface. The computer processes aerodynamic adjustments faster than the human brain can comfortably perceive them. When the jet enters a high-G combat maneuver, the interface floods the pilot's visual cortex with telemetry data. The pilots get overwhelmed. They try to fight the aircraft. They overcorrect, they stall, and they fall out of the sky. So rewrite the software, limit the data feed." "We can't," Aldridge said, his voice dropping to a desperate register. "If we throttle the interface, the jet loses its tactical advantage. It becomes just another fast plane. The Pentagon wants a paradigm shift, not a marginal upgrade. We need a pilot who can handle the sensory overload, someone who doesn't panic when the conventional rules of aerodynamics stop applying, someone whose brain naturally filters out the noise and flies entirely on instinct. Victoria stared at him, the silence stretching between them. You're out of pilots. The military won't lend you anymore because Kestrel is a meat grinder and the civilian hotshots are terrified. I need you in that cockpit, Corcoran. Victoria let out a sharp, bitter laugh. 2 years ago, you stood in front of a tribunal and called me a dangerous liability. You said my reliance on instinct over protocol was a cancer to military aviation. You stripped me of my wings, Rafferty. Now you want me to fly your suicide machine? I will reinstate your flight clearance, Aldridge said quickly, playing his only trump card. I still have leverage at the Pentagon. If you complete the Mach 3 orbital edge simulation and land the Chimera intact, I will personally see to it that your dishonorable discharge is expunged. You get your wings back. You get your career back. Victoria looked down at her oil-stained hands. The ache in her chest, the phantom sensation of pulling the throttle, of breaking the sound barrier, of existing in that pure, silent blue above the clouds, was a constant, throbbing wound. She hated Aldridge with every fibre of her being, but she loved the sky more. I want total operational control, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. No corporate engineers in my ear telling me what the computer model says I should do. If I'm in the seat, it's my plane. Aldridge nodded slowly. You have it. 72 hours later, Victoria was standing in the cavernous underground testing bay at Edwards Air Force Base. The X-77 Chimera sat in the center of the bay, bathed in harsh, surgical white light. It didn't look like a plane, it looked like a weaponized dart forged from liquid obsidian. Its swept wings were seamlessly integrated into the fuselage, lacking any visible seams or rivets. It was beautiful, predatory, and entirely lethal. Diesel O'Keefe was sitting in a wheelchair near the landing gear, an IV line still taped to the back of his hand, and dark, bruised bags under his eyes. Victoria walked over to him, her flight suit zipped halfway up. You look like hell, Rota, Victoria said gently, using his old call sign. Diesel offered a weak, crooked smile. You should see the other guy. Actually, you are looking at the other guy. He gestured to the Chimera. Don't do it, Viper. The thing is possessed. It's not just fast, it's invasive. When you plug your helmet into the NeuroSync, it feels like the jet is inside your head. When I hit Mach 2.5 and pulled into a vertical climb, the computer fed the atmospheric friction data directly into my optical nerve. I didn't just see the heat, I felt it in my teeth. I panicked, pulled the stick too hard, and the G-force ripped the consciousness right out of me. The engineers say you overcorrected, Victoria noted, studying the sleek canopy of the jet. The engineers are looking at numbers on a screen, Diesel snapped, coughing weakly. When you're up there, the jet anticipates your movements. If you hesitate, even for a microsecond, the computer interprets your hesitation as a tactical error and tries to correct it for you. You end up fighting the AI for control of the stick. And you will lose. Victoria processed this. The Chimera wasn't just a machine. It was an artificial intelligence trying to fuse with a human mind. The previous pilots failed because they were trying to fly the plane like a traditional aircraft. They were trying to dominate the machine. Thanks for the intel, Diesel, Victoria said, squeezing his shoulder. She turned toward the gantry stairs leading up to the cockpit. Aldridge's voice crackled over the hangar's PA system. Corcoran, we are on a strict timetable. The Pentagon observers are in the control room. Pre-flight diagnostics are green. Get in the seat. Victoria strapped into the carbon fiber ejection seat. The crew chief leaned over, handing her the specialized NeuroSync helmet. It was heavier than a standard flight helmet, lined with biometric sensors that would press directly against her skull. "Good luck, ma'am," the crew chief whispered, stepping back as the heavy glass canopy hissed shut, sealing her in complete, insulated silence. Victoria plugged the data umbilical cord from her helmet into the console. Instantly, the glass of her visor lit up, not with traditional heads-up display numbers, but with a cascading, three-dimensional neural map. A mechanized female voice echoed directly inside her ear canal, bypassing external speakers entirely. Neurosync connection established. Pilot biometric baseline acquired, awaiting ignition sequence. Victoria placed her hands on the throttle and the stick. For the first time in 2 years, her heart rate actually slowed down. The chaotic noise of the world faded away. "Control, this is Outlaw 1, Victoria said over the comms, her voice like ice water. "Systems are green, light the fires." Deep within the belly of the Chimera, the variable cycle engines roared to life, vibrating through Victoria's spine. The real test wasn't about to happen in the sky. The real test was whether Victoria's disgraced, rebellious mind could tame a machine that had already broken 3 of the best pilots in the world. And she was about to find out at 3,000 miles per hour, ignition engaged. The twin variable cycle engines of the X-77 Chimera unleashed a concussive shockwave that rattled the reinforced glass of the control tower. Inside the cockpit, Victoria Corcoran did not hear the roar. She felt it resonate through her ribcage. The Neurosync helmet locked onto her biometric signature, plunging her consciousness into a digital ocean. Atmospheric data, telemetry, and engine temperatures did not appear on a glass screen. They bloomed directly within her mind, like memories she was recalling in real time. It was invasive, disorienting, and profoundly terrifying. She felt the exact hydraulic pressure of the landing gear, as if it were the tension in her own knees. "Outlaw 1, you are cleared for takeoff," the air traffic controller's voice echoed in her auditory cortex. "Climb to 60,000 feet, Mach 2.5 authorization." Victoria pushed the throttle forward. The Chimera did not roll. It vaulted. Within seconds, the Mojave Desert blurred into a tan smear beneath her. The gravitational force slammed into her chest, an invisible anvil crushing her lungs. She engaged the anti-G straining maneuver, forcing blood back into her brain, but the Neurosync interface was already compensating, tightening the mechanized flight suit around her calves and abdomen before she even formed the conscious thought to brace herself. "Mach 1.2, optimal climb angle achieved," the AI's synthetic voice whispered in her mind. "I didn't set the climb angle," Victoria grunted through clenched teeth, her hands gripping the flight stick. "Adjustment made based on pilot's historical tactical preferences." Victoria frowned behind her visor. "Historical preferences? What are you talking about?" Down in the Kestrel Dynamics control room, General Rafferty Aldridge stood with his arms crossed, watching the massive telemetry screen. Beside him stood General Thomas Hackett, a Pentagon liaison known for his deep, lucrative ties to Kestrel's rival, Boeing. "She's pushing Mach 2, the flight director announced, his fingers dancing across a terminal. "Neurosync stability is at 94%. Heart rate elevated, but within acceptable combat thresholds. She's stabilizing." Hackett scowled, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "Stabilizing isn't the mission, Rafferty. The contract demands an orbital edge combat simulation. Let's see how your prodigy handles a real threat matrix. Initiate Protocol Black." Aldridge's head snapped toward Hackett. "Protocol Black? That wasn't in the simulation parameters. The AI isn't calibrated for live fire evasions with a human in the loop. You'll overload her optic nerves. If your machine cannot handle combat stress, Kestrel loses the funding today. Hackett said coldly, signaling the flight director. Launch the Valkyries, live munitions. 300 miles north, over the desolate peaks of the Sierra Nevada, 3 XQ-58A Valkyrie combat drones dropped from the bomb bay of a high-altitude B-52 Stratofortress. They ignited their thrusters, their targeting lasers painting the sky as they hunted for the Chimera. In the cockpit, Victoria's world suddenly exploded into a blinding array of crimson warning algorithms. The NeuroSync interface flooded her visual cortex with threat vectors. The pain was immediate and blinding, like an ice pick driven directly through her temples. Warning: multiple hostile bogies detected. Live radar locks established. Evasive maneuvers required. Victoria gasped, her vision going white at the edges. This was what Diesel O'Keefe had described. The jet was downloading the entire atmospheric battle space into her brain simultaneously. The AI violently jerked the flight stick to the left, attempting an aggressive barrel roll to break the radar locks. Victoria's instinct, honed by thousands of hours in F-35s, was to fight the stick, to regain manual control. She grabbed the yoke, pulling hard against the AI's motorized input. The Chimera shuddered violently, the aeroelastic wings screaming under the conflicting aerodynamic forces. The jet entered a terrifying yaw, hurtling toward a flat spin. Warning: neural desynchronization at 40%, the AI blared. You end up fighting the AI. Diesel's voice echoed in her memory. And you will lose. Victoria loosened her grip on the stick. She closed her eyes, shutting out the physical light of the cockpit, and surrendered entirely to the neural link. Computer, Victoria whispered, her breathing ragged. Who programmed your tactical baseline? Baseline Tactical Neural Net authored by Kestrel Engineering. Source material: classified DARPA flight records. Pilot designation: Outlaw 1. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Aldridge hadn't just built a smart jet. He had fed the artificial intelligence every single millimeter of telemetry from her entire military career. The court-martial, the reckless maneuvers, the instinctual rule-breaking that had gotten her fired. Aldridge had mapped it all and coded it into the Chimera's central processor. The reason every other elite pilot had crashed was that they were flying by the book. The jet was rejecting them because it had been fundamentally programmed to fly like an unhinged, rebellious renegade. It was built to fly exactly like Victoria Corcoran. She was the ghost in the machine. All right then, Victoria smiled, a fierce, predatory grin spreading across her face. Let's dance with myself. Instead of fighting the stick, she merged her intentions with the AI. She didn't command the jet with her hands. She commanded it with her raw aggression. "Control, this is Outlaw 1. Victoria's voice cracked over the radio, startling the silent, tense control room at Edwards. "I see your Valkyries. I am engaging." "Victoria, abort," Aldridge shouted into his headset, shoving the flight director aside. Hackett altered the parameters. "Those drones are armed with live AIM-9X Sidewinders. If they get a firing solution, they will shoot you down." "Then they better not get a firing solution," she replied, her voice eerily calm. Victoria pushed the Chimera past Mark III. The sky outside the canopy shifted from cobalt blues to a deep, bruised purple, and finally to the stark, terrifying black of the stratosphere. She was crossing the Armstrong Line, 80,000 feet above the Earth. At this altitude, the air was so thin that conventional aerodynamics barely applied. It was a realm of pure, brute thrust. The 3 Valkyrie drones closed in, operating on a unified hive mind protocol. They moved with terrifying robotic precision, angling to trap the Chimera in a triangulated kill box. Missile lock detected. Impact in 12 seconds, the AI warned. A standard pilot would have dumped flares and dived for denser air. Victoria's mind, perfectly synchronized with the Chimera, saw a different path. She recognized the mathematical flaw in the drone's hive mind targeting. Disengage safety limiters, Victoria commanded. Warning: structural integrity limits will be exceeded. Pilot G-force limits will be exceeded. Override. Do it. Victoria pulled the stick straight back, while simultaneously rolling the fuselage. The Chimera performed a high-altitude coolbit, a maneuver where the aircraft rapidly pitches up and loops tightly, essentially acting as an air brake while flipping backwards. At Mach 3, it was a maneuver that shattered the laws of physics. The G-force meter on her neural display spiked. 8 Gs, 9 Gs, 11 Gs, 12 Gs. Victoria screamed as the blood violently drained from her head. Her vision tunneled into a pinpoint of grey light. Capillaries in her eyes burst, painting her sclera a terrifying shade of crimson. The mechanical pressure suit squeezed her legs so hard it bruised the bone, desperately trying to keep her conscious. The pain was absolute, a crushing, suffocating weight that threatened to tear her soul from her body. But the maneuver worked. The Chimera flipped entirely backward, bleeding its speed in a fraction of a second. The 3 Valkyrie drones, traveling at Mach 2.5, instantly overshot her position, their radar locks breaking as the Chimera vanished from their forward sensors. Targeting complete, Victoria gasped, tasting copper in her mouth. The Chimera's weapons bay snapped open. Because she was unarmed, Victoria relied on the jet's secondary offensive capability, a directed electromagnetic pulse cannon designed to scramble enemy avionics. She felt the targeting reticles align in her mind. She didn't press a button. She simply thought the command to fire. Invisible waves of high-frequency electromagnetic radiation blasted from the nose of the Chimera. The 3 Valkyrie drones, suddenly hit with a concentrated burst of microwave energy, suffered instantaneous catastrophic avionics failures. Their flight computers fried. The drones went limp, tumbling out of the black sky like dead iron birds, spinning helplessly towards the Nevada desert below. Threat neutralized, airspace secure, the AI announced quietly. In the Kestrel control room, there was absolute, stunned silence. General Hackett stared at the massive screen, his mouth slightly open, the color completely drained from his face. He had just witnessed an impossible maneuver. "Flight Director," Aldridge said, his voice trembling slightly, a rare smile breaking through his corporate stoicism. "Get my pilot a landing vector." "Outlaw 1, the flight director stammered into the mic. "You are clear for descent. RTB. Good flying, Mom." Victoria eased the throttle back. Her body was trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash beginning to set in. Her chest heaved against the straps as she guided the $60 million prototype down through the atmosphere. The sky turned blue again. The jagged peaks of the mountains welcomed her home. 20 minutes later, the Chimera's tires screeched against the concrete runway at Edwards Air Force Base. The jet deployed its drag parachute, rolling to a graceful halt in the center of the tarmac. Heat waves radiated from its black fuselage. The specialized radar-absorbent paint scorched and peeling at the edges of the wings from the insane atmospheric friction. Rescue crews and engineers swarmed the aircraft. The canopy hissed open, letting in the blinding desert sunlight and the smell of aviation fuel. Victoria unclipped her harness with shaking hands. She pulled the heavy NeuroSync helmet off, gasping the hot, dry air. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot, and she felt like she had been beaten with a baseball bat. Aldridge was the first one up the gantry stairs. He stopped at the edge of the cockpit, looking down at the woman he had fired, the woman who had just saved his company and revolutionized modern aerial warfare. "You used my flight records," Victoria said, her voice raspy, locking eyes with him. "You built a jet that only a disgraced insubordinate liability could fly." Aldridge didn't flinch. He offered her a hand. "I built a jet that only the greatest pilot of our generation could fly. I needed the military to see exactly why protocol isn't always the answer. Hackett is humiliated. The Pentagon contract is secured." Victoria ignored his hand, pulling herself out of the cockpit under her own strength. "And my clearance?" "Restored," Aldridge nodded. "Effective immediately. You have your wings back, Commander Corcoran, and if you want it, you have the position of Chief Test Pilot for the Chimera program." Victoria looked back at the sleek, terrifying machine. It had nearly killed her. It had invaded her mind, and it had pushed her to the absolute brink of human endurance. But as she touched the scorched fuselage, she felt a profound, undeniable connection. They were a perfect match. Two exiled beasts of the sky, finally let off the leash. "Draw up the paperwork, Rafferty," Victoria said, climbing down the stairs, "and tell the mechanics to fix the AC. It gets a little hot at Mach 3. Did Victoria's incredible defiance against the odds leave you breathless?" This intense journey of redemption, cutting-edge aviation, and unbreakable human spirit proves that sometimes the greatest machine in the sky is the human mind. If you enjoyed this high-altitude thriller, smash that like button, share this video with your fellow aviation enthusiasts, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding stories of rebels who conquer the impossible. Leave a comment below on what jet we should feature next.